It was the synchronized massacres at Rome and Vienna airports, claiming 19 lives, including 5 Americans, that provoked the major showdown. The terrorists were using forged passports confiscated years earlier by Libyan officials. For President Reagan, that was evidence enough to confirm and publicize his passionate conviction. Colonel Gaddafi was to blame for organizing all the past attacks.
These murderers could not carry out their crimes without the sanctuary and support provided by regimes such as Colonel Gaddafi's in Libya. Gaddafi's long-standing involvement in terrorism is well documented, and there's irrefutable evidence of his role in these attacks. The Rome and Vienna murders are only the latest in a series of brutal terrorist acts committed with Gaddafi's backing. Gaddafi called them heroic actions. I call them criminal outrages by an outlaw regime.
Yet interrogated in a Vienna prison, a surviving terrorist crucially contradicted the president, undermining Washington's allegations.
You killed people yesterday, yes?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Because he's Israel.
Both groups, he said, had flown from Damascus and had had no contact with Libya. Their controller, he claimed, was the infamous terrorist Abu Nidal. Western intelligence about this master terrorist is so poor that at least 4 different photos have been issued. Antonio Bedini coordinates Italy's anti-terrorist policy. From the Prime Minister's office, Bedini claims that Italy's police agencies have indisputable proof that Syria, not Libya, backed the Arabs who committed the airport massacres.
We presume that there is a clear implications of Syria.
But the Americans say that the attack at Rome airport was organized by Gaddafi, not by Damascus.
No,
what do you say?
We don't have any evidence.
You have no evidence
supporting such affirmation. The only evidence we have shows a Syrian connection.
Do you say that it was Libya, and the president said the evidence of Libya's culpability was irrefutable?
Yeah.
But the Italian authorities to whom I've spoken say emphatically on the record that their investigations have shown that it was entirely masterminded by Syria.
I don't agree with that at all.
Well, they've interrogated the surviving terrorists.
I must just say I don't agree with that.
But you've no evidence that Libya was in on the planning either.
Our evidence on Libya is circumstantial but very strong.
But why does the president then say it's irrefutable if you call it circumstantial?
Well, people can be convicted and sentenced in our courts on circumstantial evidence.
Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli defense minister, also disputes the American case.
Syria was responsible to the following terror attacks. First, the attacks on El Al encounters in the airports of Vienna and Rome. We have the evidence that the Abu Nidal group terrorists left Syria via Belgrade to these 2 places. And no doubt, even though Abu Nidal is linked to Libya and Syria, those terrorists that carried out these 2 outrageous atrocities went from Syria to their targets.
He was chosen as a prime target. He was the only government leader who was publicly espousing terrorism as a legitimate weapon. And there's no question but what Libya was more vulnerable than Syria and Iran.
He was a soft
and
target.
That is certainly an element, of course.
The U.S. public, the United States, the Congress, wanted the U.S. government to take some actions. They needed to find some terrorists. They needed to blame a country. Libya was a prime raving candidate.
Libya were less downside consequences, if you will. There's less Arab support for Gaddafi. We figured there would be less Soviet support for Gaddafi.
Although investigation of other attacks on Europeans or Americans has failed to produce evidence of direct Libyan involvement, Gaddafi has supported many terrorist groups, including the IRA. London 1984 provided a clear example of Libya's frequent disregard for life, when policewoman Yvonne Fletcher was killed by a shot fired from inside the Libyan embassy. But it happened during a demonstration by Libyans opposing the Gaddafi regime. Israeli intelligence is certain that all those deliberately murdered on Tripoli's orders have been Libyans or other Arab opponents. For 30 years, Rafi Aitan, a senior intelligence officer, has fought Arab terrorists in the Middle East and Europe.
Gaddafi has no organization of his own. He has only a small organization that is within his intelligence services that doing terror activity against Libyans or against fellow Arabs, but not against Europeans or Americans.
Gaddafi has never killed non-Libyans?
Never killed non-Libyans.
But in your experience, has Libya ever had the capability or the capacity to mount an operation directly against the United States?
I would say no.
A bomb exploded. The casualties were an American soldier and a Turkish woman killed and hundreds injured. It was the peak of American frustration. With public support, the American government seized on the death as the reason to retaliate against Gaddafi, releasing allegedly secret intelligence to justify bombing Tripoli.
The despicable attack in Berlin fits the pattern of increased Libyan activities, including Rome and Vienna. We have suspicions that this bombing is part of that pattern.
Can you indicate if it might be Mr. Gaddafi?
Let us say he is definitely a suspect.
The grounds for that certainty, not revealed immediately, were coded messages allegedly sent between the Libyan People's Bureau in East Berlin and Tripoli. The Americans had apparently intercepted the incriminating exchange, anticipating the Labelle explosion. The first message from Berlin to Tripoli, dispatched the day before the bombing, stated, "Await a development tomorrow morning, as God wills." The second message from Berlin to Tripoli, dispatched on the day of the bombing, stated, "At 1:30 this morning, a successful operation was accomplished without leaving any trace of our identity. Signed, People's Bureau, Berlin." The third message from Tripoli to Berlin, following the explosion, were congratulations for the act. For most, the intercepts were conclusive.
Our evidence is direct, it is precise, it is irrefutable.
The administration's interpretation that they had proved Libya had planned the explosion is, some feel, suspect.
The analyst was certainly, I'm convinced, pressured into developing a prima facie case against the Libyan government.
They had to find the evidence against Libya.
Well, I think that's probably true.
To prove the credibility of American intelligence, the administration subsequently claimed that American military police in West Berlin were evacuating servicemen from discos before the explosion, although discos weren't mentioned in the intercepts.
We knew that they had ordered an attack in Berlin. Berlin's a big place. And we were in the process of trying to track down. In this case, we were not able to identify the particular disco and get people cleaned out in time.
We were within 15 minutes, according to General Rogers, of getting notifications with respect to this particular installation as to the fact that it was potentially a dangerous area.
Clearing discos that night would have been the responsibility of Major Ruth LaFontaine, the deputy commander of all US military police in West Berlin. If Washington's account is accurate, she would have responded to the alerts. Yet she denies that any warning was ever issued.
We were not on any kind of alert status. We had no additional security measures. It was just a regular day for us.
Some people have said that before the explosion went off, the MPs under your control were already trying to clear the discos of American troops.
I heard that the day after. But that was not true. We were on routine patrol. I had no knowledge whatsoever and had not instructed my patrols to do anything out of the ordinary.
And if anyone would know, it would be you?
Yes, I would have known, because I would have had to have directed the patrols and provided the instruction.
But were you aware at the time at all that Berlin was in any way a possible target of terrorism?
No, not at all.
But as the likelihood of the bombing became public, doubts were raised whether Libya was the right target.
There has at the same time been a lot of evidence or a lot of finger pointing towards Syria, but we have not heard anything that specifically targets the Syrians as also being perpetrators of terrorism.
No, we'll go wherever the finger points. But so far, the leads have not gone in that direction on some of the more recent events.
Yet at German intelligence headquarters near Munich, officials are emphatic that the only intelligence they possess are the intercepts supplied by America. Carsten Vogt, a member of West Germany's parliament, was briefed by those officials.
My impression was that they were not so convinced that there was a Libyan connection. The likelihood for a Syrian involvement in this terrorist activity is much higher than the likelihood for a Libyan involvement.
Tom, Tripoli is under attack. I can see planes going overhead. I can hear lots of explosions. There is small arms fire going off here and there around. This started just as the program went on the air.
Some claim the raid was timed to coincide with the start of the main evening news in America.
I have talked to planners, some people who were involved in the very tiny group who planned it, and it was timed for the major newscasts.
Despite our repeated warnings, Gaddafi continued his reckless policy of intimidation, his relentless pursuit of terror. He counted on America to be passive. He counted wrong.
After the euphoria, the administration lost interest in Gaddafi. Others, however, are convinced that Tripoli had not been behind the terrorist attacks aimed at America. Washington, they say, bombed the wrong target.
If I analyze the American raid on Libya, and I ask myself why they did it on Libya and not on Syria, when and where they knew that, to my opinion, that the Syrians were more responsible to the attacks, that because of that the raid was made, I would say it was done because of political reasons. That means it was a political decision to do it against Gaddafi and not against Assad.
Assad's Syria has always been a haven for various terrorists, and Damascus is possibly the key to events which triggered the bombing of Tripoli.
The Libyans perhaps, nevertheless, were fairly treated because the Libyan People's Bureau in East Berlin chose to claim credit for the Label d'Escaut. Now, perhaps they had decided to take credit for something that someone else did for which they weren't responsible. If that's the case, then I would say they got whatever was coming to them for taking responsibility for it.
But that is a possibility, isn't it?
It's always a possibility.
Gaddafi took credit for it. That doesn't mean he did it. And the president wanted to believe him.
I stress again, I am sure they did it because of political reasons. Put it this way, I feel that they had better chance to, let's say, to overcome difficulties inside America if they fight, if they do something against Gaddafi, than against Assad.